We have come to what might be the finale of BCache, or at the very least, the series is going on hiatus for quite a while. If you've not seen my prior videos on the file system or its developers' escapades in the kernel, I highly recommend you go check those out first, because I'm going to skip over a lot of that historical background context. As a TLDR though, its developer, Kent Overstreet, the main guy behind BCacheFS, there are other people involved in the project, but he's the guy, has been openly ignoring kernel development rules for basically since BCacheFS has been in the kernel, being reminded on a frequent basis to fix those issues, and then coming back a few months later with a patch set, doing the exact same thing, frequently getting into arguments over these rules and why he shouldn't have to follow them, why they shouldn't be rules. As an example, because it slows down the development of his file system. Now, nobody else has this issue except for him, so the rules don't change because they seem to be working for everybody else. Now, it would be fine to get into discussions about kernel processes and how to improve them, and no issue there. The problem is where he brings them up and how he tries to do so. It's in the patch sets where he's breaking the rules, not a separate discussion about the processes of the kernel, and this happens over and over and over and over again. And Kent is by no means a new kernel developer. If he'd been doing it for like 6 months, a year, yeah, maybe he's trying to get like his footing in there and not really sure about the rules and forgetting things. Again, not an issue. He is not a new developer though. This project by itself has been going on for 9 years, and he's been in the kernel considerably longer than that. He is someone who should understand by now how the Linux kernel mailing list functions, how kernel development is done, and what he needs to do to be a productive member of this community. Now, there's a few different ways that we can approach this. Kent has released a giant post over on his Patreon detailing what happened, what the kernel could do better, what maybe he could have done better, and all the details of the situation, and we'll get to this a bit later, but I think the best place to start is the enforcement notice and the thread leading to his ban, suspension, whatever term you want to use. Here is the link to the email thread. The Code of Conduct Committee has determined that your written abuse of another community member required action on your part to repair the damage to the individual and the community. You took insufficient action to restore the community's faith in having otherwise productive technical discussions without the fear of personal attacks. Following the Code of Conduct interpretation process, the TAB, the Technical Advisory Board, has approved. No one approved the proofreading of this. The following recommendation: restrict Kent Overstreet's participation in the kernel development process during the Linux 6.13 kernel development cycle. Scope: decline all pull requests from Kent Overstreet during the Linux 6.13 kernel development cycle. This does not mean it is a permanent ban. It is specifically a ban from the current development cycle. So for the next cycle, he is allowed back in development, assuming they don't find another reason to ban him, he doesn't get into another fight, you know, things that Kent is probably going to end up doing. Let's take a look at the message. This is a direct response to Michael Hocko, also working on BCacheFS code. Michael, if you think crashing processes is an acceptable alternative to error handling, you have no business writing kernel code. Now, if this is where he had stopped, yes, it's a bit aggressive, and yes, it might get you banned from some other projects, but considering the Linux kernel mailing list, this is completely reasonable, right? It is not acceptable to crash if you're writing kernel code. The problem is he didn't stop there. You have been stridently arguing for one bad idea after another, and is an insult to those of us who do give a shit about writing reliable software. You're arguing against basic precepts of kernel programming. Get your head examined and get the F out of here with this shit. Now, it should be pretty obvious the lines that are probably too far, but just in case, here is a graphic explaining it. The second part and also the last part, like, you could have just deleted those and it wouldn't have been a problem. Especially the last line. Like, the last line here, this is just an insult. Like, this is so far away from the technical issues. It shouldn't be there at all. And I'm not saying this is the only correct interpretation. If you have a different one, feel free to disagree with me. But the Linux kernel mailing list is a place where you're supposed to focus on the technical issues and actually work on kernel development. It is the same with the Wayland Protocol repo. It is the same with a GNOME repo or a KDE repo or any other repo. The repo is supposed to be focused on the project and not just random other stuff. Now, some people might say, oh, but what about Linus Torvalds? Isn't he always chewing people out? Isn't he always getting into flame wars? If we're talking about Linus in 1999, yes, Linus back then would just argue with people for the sake of arguing and would just insult people. If we're talking about Linus now, though, Linus now, yes, he is kind of aggressive and does write things like this quite often. But when he is being aggressive, he is focusing on the technical issues. That is the key difference. He is not just insulting people for the sake of insulting them. Now, this reply didn't just come out of nowhere. This is a reply quite a ways down an existing thread, started on this one here, BCacheFS, do not use pfmem_alloc, no reclaim, started by Michael Hocko. Now, as Kent does in earlier messages, he was being needlessly aggressive, but maybe you could interpret it being too far, but look, I've read plenty of the Linux mailing list, and I've seen a lot worse than this. This is utter brain damage. Rule number 1 of kernel programming is that you check for errors if you don't know that your GFP no-fail usage is in a safe context, and that's not just memory reclaim context, it's also the size of your allocation, then you have to check for errors. Yes, this doesn't need to be here, but the majority of the paragraph is a technical issue. And in a later reply, except that's bullshit. At the very least, any dynamically sized allocation definitely has to have an error path that's tested, and if there's questions about the context a code path might run in, that's another reason. Again, doesn't need to be here, but standard LKML. And I want to be clear that most of Kent's comments are completely fine. There wasn't a flame war going on. This wasn't something where he was constantly insulting people. Most of what he said is just technical discussion, not even anywhere near the line. Now, following the outburst, there was a reply from Jonathan Corbett of LWN. Kent, this is not the way to deal with your peers in this community, no matter how strongly you disagree with them. Might I suggest calming down a bit, followed by an apology? Thanks, John. He kind of signs off the same way that Greg does, just having a capital here. I really appreciate Greg's lack of capital uses in his sign-off. But the more important response is from Shua Khan of the COC committee. Using language like this is clearly unacceptable and violates the code of conduct. This type of language doesn't promote respectful and productive discussions and is detrimental to the health of the community. You should be well aware that this type of language and personal attack is a clear violation of the Linux kernel contributor covenant code of conduct as outlined in the code of conduct. Refer to the code of conduct and refrain from violating the code of conduct in the future. Now keep in mind the date here, September 4th. That's going to be very important a bit later. So following this comment, Kent did reply. I believe Michael and I have more or less worked this out privately, and you guys have been copied on that as well. So they dealt with it like adults, they talked it out, that's all done. Honestly, I would love to see more of this from the FOSS world. There's a lot of people who just want to continue the argument until the end of time. This reply was on the 20th of November, quite a while afterwards. Following this, there was another reply from Shua Khan, indicating that a private apology isn't exactly what they wanted. I will make one correction to your statement. You guys have been copied on that as well, which is inaccurate. You have shared your email exchanges with Mike with us to let us know the issue has been sorted out. You might have your reasons and concerns about the direction of the code and design that pertains to the discussion in this email thread. You might have your reasons for expressing your frustration. However, those need to be worked out as separate from this code of conduct violation. In the case of unacceptable behaviors, as defined in the Code of Conduct document, the process is to work towards restoring productive and respectful discussions. It is reasonable to ask for an apology to help us get to that goal as soon as possible. I urge you once again to apologize for using language that negatively impacts productive discussions. Now, Kent did apologize to the person affected. The issue is the Code of Conduct Committee wants a public apology. And then a few messages went back and forth with Kent kind of just being confused about what's going on because from his side, he's already dealt with the problem, and then Kent doing what Kent always does, trying to start an argument about the kernel processes. I say trying because he ended up replying to himself 3 separate times in a row. Now, I've seen a lot of people online trying to just immediately crucify Kent over the lack of an apology, and don't get me wrong, Kent is in the wrong for posting that message originally. He should have rethought it, he should have included the insult at the end. But let's pay attention to when things happened. So Kent's original message that was cited for the ban was sent on September 2nd. Okay, the enforcement notice was posted on November 22nd, and the new formalized enforcement guidelines on November 14th, over 2 months after the incident took place. In these guidelines, it mentions the public apology. The goal is to reach a resolution which is agreeable to all parties. If working with the individual fails to bring about the desired outcome, the Code of Conduct Committee will evaluate other measures, such as seeking public apology to repair the damage. The Code of Conduct Committee publicly calls out the behavior in the setting which the violation has taken place, seeking public apology for the violation. A public apology for the violation is the first step towards rebuilding the trust. Trust is essential for the continued success and health of the community, which operates on trust and respect. If a public apology is not done, that is when bans can take place. This is the part that kinda rubs me the wrong way. Yes, the Code of Conduct already existed, but these enforcement guidelines are new. So you're using new enforcement guidelines for an event that took place before those guidelines existed. Now, don't get me wrong, Kent was gonna break the rules sometime shortly in the future anyway, and these guidelines would have affected him. Do I think they should have in this case? Not necessarily. If he dealt with the problem with the person and they were both fine with it, I think for that case it's fine. In future events, which Kent is absolutely gonna do, go ahead and do whatever you want with these new guidelines. Now, following all this going down, the way that most people found out about this is from Kent's Patreon post, Trouble in the Kernel. TLDR, the future of BCacheFS in the kernel is uncertain and lots of things aren't looking good. Linus has said he isn't accepting my 6.13 pull request per an open issue with the COC board, and at this point, I have no idea what's going on with the COC board. I, for my part, have felt for quite some time that there are issues about our culture and the way we do work that need to be raised, and that hasn't been going anywhere, hence this post. Now, pretty much all the first half is just focusing on the technical issues of what was going on in that thread, basically why he got into an argument like in the first place. So we'll jump ahead past that. I got emails from multiple people, including Linus, to the effect of, trust me, you don't want to be known as an asshole. You should probably send him an apology. You'll find what I sent and the response at the bottom now that the rest of this is public. The emails I got, there were several, also all made ominous mentions of the COC committee. You'd almost think they were talking about the boogeyman. The COC's approach is that if something comes to their attention, determined by anonymous complaints and private proceedings, they'll demand that someone make a public apology or else. But my response was to say no to a public apology for a variety of reasons, because this was the result of an ongoing situation that had now impacted 2 different teams and projects, and I think that issue needs attention. And I think there's broader issues at stake here regarding the COC board, but mostly because that kind of thing feels like it ought to be kept personal. I don't know how you guys feel, but anytime I see someone make a public apology, even if they're being completely sincere, even if they actually mean, yes, I really am sorry for what I've done, it always just feels a little bit dishonest. Anytime like someone says sorry to a camera or writes down their sorry, it just feels like a public performance. But regardless, that is how we got to the situation that we are in now. To start with, I was approached at Plumbers by one notable COC member and stable kernel maintainer, and in that conversation, while pressuring me to follow the COC's process, he spoke quite a bit about how this is important for our community's image and made repeated mentions about how it would be a shame if I wasn't around anymore. It's hard to read the talk of image as anything other than perhaps corporate friendly, and I bring that up because that is another sentiment I've heard at Plumbers from another high-level kernel maintainer and elsewhere, that Linux is for big tech companies now in those exact words. Now, assuming that conversation actually happened, I do agree that gives a lot of like corporate-y HR vibes, but here's the thing. If that is the direction the kernel wants to go in, if they want to be this squeaky clean, corporate-friendly project, they can do that. The kernel today doesn't have to be the kernel of 1999. Now, the kernel of 1999, that might have been a better approach, or what we have today might be a better approach. But if the people running the kernel want to go down this different route, they're free to do so. Linux got started without the help of the big tech companies. I was getting my education as an engineer from a mailing list 25 years ago, and tech companies come and go, it will outlive them. They're just visiting. Our duties are to the community, to the users, to fostering and preserving a working engineering culture that the world looks to and relies on. And needless to say, threatening someone's career to get them to comply is not a great approach. This is something Kent likes to do quite often. He'll talk about the way the kernel used to be. It was like this 20 years ago, but 20 years ago, the kernel was also considerably smaller, considerably less important. Nowadays, Linux powers the web. Desktop Linux, the users of Linux, the community around Linux, doesn't matter at all to Linux. Just look at the Linux Foundation. Linux today is a corporate project that's developed in a community setting. And it didn't help matters any that before our talk, in casual conversation with others right outside the conference, the very same COC member managed to call every single file system community member who came up by name an arsehole. Needless to say, such conduct is not the norm at conferences and is no more acceptable here than on the list. Rules for me and not for thee. Now, the difference here is this happened outside the conference, firstly, not inside the conference, and didn't happen on the mailing list. Now, if the Linux kernel community wants to start moderating people's DMs or people's private group chats and banning people from the Linux kernel because they were mean to people on a Discord server, yes, I will agree, they are going way too far. But if you're doing something in the official communication channel, that is a very different matter. Let's put it like this. Let's say you're working at a company and there is a business Slack channel. Now, if you're in that Slack channel, just arguing with other employees, insulting them, and then HR comes to you and says, hey, don't do that. You are in the wrong. Now, if you're doing that in a private Discord channel and arguing in there, saying the exact same stuff, I don't think they should have any say on that. It is the exact same in this case as well. Later interactions over email became even more absurd, with Shure at first talking about having a conversation, then later making it clear that conversation would only be about getting me to write my public apology, with zero room for discussing anything else, then proceeding to turn into more and more of a broken record. Did I break his brain? Now, the important thing to remember, when you're talking to a COC committee, when you're talking to HR, you are not talking to a human. You are talking to a process. You're effectively talking to an AI chatbot. You do not have the ability to discuss anything that is going wrong here. You will follow the process because that is the only thing they are capable of doing. With that being said, in a comment on the mailing list, Shure does acknowledge that maybe they talk in too formal of a style when talking on behalf of the Code of Conduct Committee, and would people prefer a less formal style in communication? Personally, I would, because I do not like communicating with a robot. How things could be different. Being too heavy-handed is bad because it discourages people from engaging, and it encourages a culture of dismissiveness because that's safer than engaging in a discussion that may turn into a heated argument. Now, if you're not capable of having a discussion with someone that doesn't turn into a heated argument, you probably shouldn't be having that discussion in the first place. Now, yes, you might get aggressive, and yes, you might say some things that probably could be worded differently. But again, once you stray away from actually talking about the issue and you're just calling someone a moron, like, it's time to step away and go outside and touch some grass. More than that, I found that when intelligent engineers are stuck at loggerheads, frustrated and butting heads, there's usually something technically interesting and it's worth getting to the bottom of, and it really helps if a neutral third party can take an interest and figure out what's going on. When people get frustrated, they get tunnel vision, and they often forget the wider picture. There's usually plenty of common ground, and the details might not be as important as they were thought to be. This, I think, is true for every single discussion. You will often see people arguing, just bashing their heads over the exact same point, when at the end of the day, everybody agrees on the core foundational principles. Everybody is trying to make this thing better, but they can't see past their specific implementation. I do think in a case like that, having a third party, and this is, I think, what a COC committee actually could be useful for, being that third party that can lay out both sides of the argument to allow people to actually get back on track. So this dispute with the COC takes on a personal element for me as someone who's community-minded and takes pride in my work and hates to the same work done badly. And hates to see the same work done badly, I think is what he's trying to say. I'd like a better process that isn't so heavy-handed for dealing with situations where tensions rise and communications break down. As for that process, just talk to people. It's amazing what you can learn and what you can accomplish by just talking with people and listening with an open mind. People's frustrations are worth listening to and worth addressing, and sometimes there's complex situations that need to be addressed. I completely agree with this statement, 100%. But Kent is not the best messenger for the statement. He ends it off by saying, almost universally, anytime there's a power... He's not proofread any of this. Power vacuum, whether in the first larger-than-tribe societies or in societies where state power has become weak, the first authority figure that filled the power vacuum are dicks. Overly violent, because that's how they come to power. I wonder if that explains some of what we've been seeing in free software communities as a whole, as COC boards have been springing up, wielding real power in ways that feel quite uncomfortable. I don't think there's any going back to the way things used to be, but perhaps with some awareness, we can get this pointed in a better direction. Another note that I was raising with the CSC is that a culture of dismissiveness of finding ways to avoid technical discussions we're supposed to be having really is toxic, and more so than mere flame wars. I agree, but it's not a binary. It's not pure technical HR discussion with zero aggressiveness or flame wars. There is a healthy medium here where you can be kind of aggressive on the LKML, but not just insulting people for the sake of insulting people. But as I said earlier, let me know your thoughts down below. What do you think of this situation? Who do you think is in the wrong? What do you generally think of COCs and COC committees? I would love to know. So if you like the video, go like the video. And if you really like the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out my Patreon, Scribes, LiberaPay, linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and show me your COC.
Like this.